She stood up slowly, her diamond bracelet catching the candlelight. Her voice was sharp, clear, and cold enough to freeze the entire dining room mid-bite. People like you don't belong in places like this. Every fork paused mid-air. Every eye turned. At a luxury rooftop restaurant filled with polished cutlery and whispered conversations, her words landed like a slap to the soul. The couple didn't say a word. They just sat there, still too graceful to scream, too proud to flinch. And yet, someone behind them was already filming. Within 15 minutes, that video would explode across the internet, and by the time dessert was served, the world would be ready to flip the table. It was a Thursday night in the heart of downtown, the kind of place where valet attendants wore gloves, where wine menus were handed out like sacred texts, and where reservation books were booked out 2 weeks in advance. Marcus had planned the evening carefully, he always did. He wore a navy suit pressed to perfection. Lana, radiant in a satin emerald dress, had her hair swept into a loose twist that shimmered in the candlelight. To anyone watching, they looked like what they were: elegant, refined, in love. They were seated near the window with a view of the skyline behind them. The waiter greeted them politely, poured their water, and took their appetizer order. Everything felt right until she arrived. Helen Davenport entered the restaurant with the air of someone who had never been told no. In her 60s, her skin taut from just enough surgery to be noticeable, Helen wore a crisp white Chanel jacket over a silk blouse, diamonds trailing from her ears to her fingers. She didn't walk, she glided. She was known to the staff not for kindness, but for influence. She was one of the restaurant's investors. When she spoke, people listened mainly out of fear. She was seated 2 tables away, but her attention snapped toward Marcus and Lana like a hound scenting smoke. She narrowed her eyes, tilted her head slightly, and whispered something to the maitre d'. He leaned down, nodded quickly, and walked away. Then came the first sign. A young waiter, barely 20, approached Marcus and Lana, visibly nervous. "I'm so sorry to ask, but do you happen to have your reservation confirmation email?" Marcus raised a brow, confused but cooperative. He pulled out his phone and showed it. "Of course," he said, calm. The waiter nodded, apologized, and left. From across the room, Helen watched with a sour smirk. Then she stood up. There was no warning, no subtlety, just a sudden scraping of her chair and the sharp clack of her heels as she walked straight to their table. "You must be confused," she said. "This section is reserved for our premier clientele, not tourists." Lana blinked. "I'm sorry," Helen didn't back down. "You people always find ways to sneak into spaces that don't belong to you. And frankly, it's ruining the atmosphere." A silence fell like a shroud. Conversations halted. Knives stopped mid-cut. Across the room, a young woman at another table slowly lifted her phone and hit record. Marcus didn't speak. Not yet. His jaw tightened, but he reached across the table and gently squeezed Lana's hand. She was shaking, but not from fear. From rage she was too graceful to unleash. Helen turned to the waiter. "Please remove them, or I'll take my business and investment elsewhere." The waiter looked, torn eyes darting between management and the silent couple. Before he could move, Marcus rose to his feet. Not with anger, with dignity. He didn't shout, didn't curse. He simply looked Helen dead in the eyes and said, "We'll leave, but not because you told us to." He held Lana's hand as they walked out past the staring diners, past the frozen waiters. But before the door closed behind them, Lana turned just once and offered a calm, disarming smile. "You've mistaken money for class, ma'am." Back inside, the young woman hit upload. 15 minutes later, the clip had hit 10,000 views. By the end of the night, it would be a global reckoning. They hadn't expected the night to go like that. Just 15 minutes earlier, Marcus had smiled as he pulled the chair out for Lana, helping her settle into her seat by the window. The city glowed behind her, like a painting, soft golden alive. Their table was set for 2 crisp linens and delicate wine glasses, catching the amber light of overhead chandeliers. For a brief moment, everything felt suspended in perfection. They'd worked hard all week, Marcus with his caseload, Lana with back-to-back lectures. This dinner had been his idea, a quiet celebration of surviving another storm without losing their rhythm. He knew she loved little surprises, so he'd called ahead, picked the corner table she once pointed at during a walk, even requested her favorite Riesling be chilled in advance. Their waiter, a young man named David, had been kind and attentive from the start. He greeted them with warmth, took their coats, made soft conversation about the special of the evening. But something shifted the moment Helen Davenport entered. She hadn't even said anything at first, just walked past their table, paused for a second too long, then glanced at David with a subtle but unmistakable arch of her brow. That was all it took. David's demeanor dimmed like a candle in the wind. His tone turned clipped, his eye contact uncertain. He began checking the reservation book more often. His smile became thinner, almost apologetic, as if he were anticipating trouble he couldn't name out loud. Marcus noticed. Lana too, but they didn't say anything. Not yet. Around them, other diners had begun to notice the tension, but no one acknowledged it. A couple at the next table cast quick glances their way, then resumed sipping wine and murmuring. A woman near the entrance whispered something to her husband, who didn't look up from his menu. It was the kind of room where discomfort was smoothed over by polite silence, the kind of place where injustice didn't yell, it sat still and dressed in pearls. Helen had been coming to this restaurant for years. She'd earned a reputation not for generosity or charm, but for the way her presence sent ripples of unease through every corner she occupied. There were stories, always whispers, of staff being fired for minor slip-ups, of other customers asked to move tables when Helen decided the view didn't suit her. No one had ever dared document it. She wielded influence like a dagger wrapped in silk, quiet, cold, and close to the skin. She didn't see Marcus and Lana as guests. She saw them as a disruption. To her, black elegance was always an act, something performative, out of place, a suit that didn't fit the skin. She didn't see Marcus's calm as dignity. She mistook it for arrogance. She didn't hear Lana's quiet confidence as grace. She registered it as defiance. And then from across the room, someone pressed record. Her name was May. She was 23, a sociology major at UC Berkeley, seated 2 tables behind Marcus and Lana, with her laptop still open from studying. She hadn't planned to capture anything that night. She was there working on her thesis, The Silent Machinery of Social Spaces, an analysis of how unspoken rules shape public life in elite environments. But when Helen spoke, something shifted in her. The mask slipped, the air stiffened, and May realized this was no longer theory, it was live. Her hands trembled slightly as she held up her phone, not high, not obvious, but steady enough. She didn't aim to go viral. She just wanted to have proof in case no one else said anything. In case the story became twisted, as these things so often did. She typed a caption before uploading the clip. This is how some people treat others when they think nobody's watching. She couldn't have predicted what would come next. Within the first 10 minutes, her notifications lit up. People were tagging friends, duetting the video, reposting with hashtags like Gauchner Elegance Exposed and Dinner with Racism. Someone added subtitles. Another slowed down the footage and zoomed in on Helen's face. And somewhere across the city, Marcus and Lana were sitting in silence in their car, still digesting the taste of humiliation that no expensive wine could wash away. What they didn't know yet, what May didn't know, what Helen definitely didn't know, was that the table that night wouldn't just serve dinner, it would serve justice. The silence that followed wasn't hollow, it was charged. The kind of silence that pressed against your chest and made the air feel thick with tension. It had started as a ripple, a few startled glances, some shifting in seats, but now it sat heavy on every table, like a third course no one ordered. Helen didn't sit down. She remained standing, chin raised, voice louder now, her tone no longer just dismissive, but demanding. I won't spend a single dollar in a place that lets people like them dine next to me, she said, throwing her hand out like she was swatting away something offensive. This is a luxury establishment, not a subway car. The restaurant manager, a man in his 40s with a stiff vest and eyes that had weathered years of wealthy entitlement, hurried over. His name tag read Stephen, but his face read panic. He tried to calm the situation, offering hushed reassurances, but Helen wasn't having it. I'm a stakeholder, she snapped. Are you really going to let this stand? I come here every week. I practically built this place's reputation. Stephen looked to Marcus and Lana. His lips parted, then closed. He knew the couple had done nothing wrong. Their reservation was valid, their attire impeccable, their manners flawless. And yet he also knew what Helen's wrath could mean. Reviews pulled influence, spread funding, jeopardized. His silence stretched just long enough to make his internal conflict visible. Marcus saw it. Lana saw it, but neither moved. Instead, Marcus reached across the table, gently placing his hand over Lana's. She'd been gripping her water glass so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. He gave her a subtle squeeze and anchor, a silent reminder that they weren't going to give this woman the reaction she was hoping for. Not here. Not like this. Helen, emboldened by the lack of resistance, took a step closer to their table. Her voice dropped, but her words sharpened. "You don't belong here. This isn't your kind of place," she hissed, "and everyone knows it." That was when the weight of the room shifted entirely. No one was eating, forks lay still. Conversations had dissolved into stunned silence. Phones were out now, not many but enough. Discreetly, cautiously, people had begun to record. But only May, still seated 2 tables away, held her phone openly. Camera, steady face, pale and taut with disbelief. She hadn't stopped filming. A young server, barely more than a boy, approached Helen from the side, his voice soft but clear. "Ma'am, please sit down." Helen spun toward him with a fury so sharp it startled him into stepping back. "Mind your position," she snapped. "I pay your salary, remember that." The server swallowed hard and faded back into the shadows, his eyes cast down, his dignity bruised in the process. It was Lana who finally spoke. She stood slowly, her movements unhurried but deliberate, her chin high, gaze unwavering, as she locked eyes with the woman who had tried to shrink her into silence. For a moment she didn't speak. Her eyes said enough, but when she did, her voice was like velvet stretched over steel. "We'll leave," she said, her tone measured, not bitter. "But your dignity left this room long before we did." And just like that, it was done. Marcus rose beside her, his hand finding hers. Fingers interlaced, not out of fear, but defiance. Together they walked between the tables, past the stairs and the silence. Past the manager, who still hadn't moved past the woman who had tried to make them small. No one clapped. No one stood. But everyone watched. Some with shame, some with awe. All with the growing awareness that something irreversible had just happened. The front door closed behind them. Inside, May's hands trembled as she stopped the recording. By the time Marcus and Lana reached the sidewalk, her video had already surpassed 100,000 views. And in the quiet that followed, the dining room wasn't just full, it was exposed. And the table that once belonged to Helen's world, it would never feel the same again. By the time Marcus and Lana got home, the video had already found its way into every corner of the internet. They didn't know it yet. They were still quiet in the car, still carrying the weight of the evening, like a suit that didn't quite fit, stiff with emotions that hadn't yet found words. They didn't speak much, just held hands, fingers loosely intertwined as the city passed in blurred headlights. But online, the world was already erupting. Within an hour, May's livestream had crossed 500,000 views. Before midnight, it reached 2.8 million. By morning, it was on every major platform: Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, TikTok edits, layered with dramatic music and captions in every language. The final moment. Lana's calm yet cutting words, "But your dignity left this room long before we did," became a viral quote reposted on everything from art collages to protest posters. Internet sleuths working with the precision of a forensic unit identified the woman in the video in under 3 hours. Helen Davenport, CEO and founder of Elegance, first a luxury skincare empire built on the language of dignity, refinement, and class. She had graced covers of women's magazines, hosted empowerment brunches, and spoken on stages about inclusion in business. Now her image appeared alongside words like hypocrite and racist, and every polished press photo of her looked suddenly like satire. It didn't take long for the storm to move from comments to consequences. By midday, "Your Elegance is over" was trending in multiple countries. Influencers began dropping the brand publicly, filming themselves tossing products in the trash or mailing them back in protest. Sephora quietly pulled the brand from its featured listings. Boutique spas removed displays overnight. Celebrities tweeted statements of support for Marcus and Lana, with some even sharing their own stories of discrimination in upscale spaces. Helen tried to respond. She released a statement on her personal Instagram, white background, black text, carefully edited. "This video is a misrepresentation. It was maliciously edited. The situation is being misunderstood. But the internet doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive staged denial. The original video was uncut, raw, and damning. It showed everything from her words to her tone to the cold silence that followed. Her statement backfired spectacularly. Comments flooded in by the thousands. So much for class. If that's how you act unedited, maybe we should all take a closer look at what elegance really means. The damage was done, but the story wasn't over. A week later, Marcus and Lana appeared on Evening Perspective, one of the nation's top news talk shows. The host introduced them not just as the couple from the viral video, but as individuals with stories of their own. Marcus was revealed to be a civil rights legal consultant, someone who had quietly worked behind the scenes for over a decade, helping win settlements for victims of racial profiling and workplace discrimination. Lana taught at a nonprofit school for deaf and hard of hearing children, her gentle strength not just evident in that moment of confrontation, but in every day of her life. When asked why they didn't respond more forcefully that night, Marcus answered with the kind of clarity that silences even the most jaded viewer. "We weren't silent out of weakness," he said. "We were silent because we knew history would speak louder." And it did. The video clip from that moment, Marcus in his Navy suit, Lana beside him in calm composure, became the second most shared post of the week. Their silence had become a statement, and now their voices were being heard everywhere. The restaurant, under growing pressure, released its own statement days later. The owner apologized directly to Marcus, and Lana denounced Helen's behavior and announced a partnership with Lana's school, donating a portion of monthly profits to support inclusive education. For many, it felt like a kind of justice. The world knew their names now not as victims, but as examples of what grace under fire truly looked like. And as for Helen, the woman who once reserved the best table in the house, she hadn't just lost her seat. She'd been removed from the room entirely. The fall didn't come slowly. It crashed like glass, loud, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Within 3 days of the video going viral, Elegance First, once a darling of the luxury beauty industry, lost more than 60% of its market value. Stocks plummeted as investors scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. The trading floor was a storm of sell orders. Executives whispered words like rebrand liability and irrecoverable, while emails between PR teams carried the quiet panic of people watching something they'd spent years building begin to crumble in hours. Sephora and Nordstrom, once proud partners, released near-identical statements within 24 hours. "We are pausing all collaboration with Elegance First, pending further review." In truth, there was no need for a review. The decision had already been made by the people with their wallets, with their tweets, with their unshakable memory of Helen Davenport's voice and that look in her eyes. Fashion Week events that Helen had sponsored began quietly removing her logo from banners. Influencer collaborations were canceled mid-campaign. Beauty editors who once praised her products now published full-page pieces titled "When Elegance Turns Ugly." But the real blow came from within. Employees, many of whom had silently endured Helen's iron grip and microaggressions, began to speak. An open letter circulated online written by 27 current and former staff members. They described a toxic environment where minority employees were routinely overlooked, demeaned, or spoken down to. Some recounted instances where Helen had asked if a Black employee was from the customer service team while they were presenting strategy in a board meeting. Others recalled being told to tone down their hairstyles or speak more professionally in client calls. The letter ended with a simple, devastating line: "She marketed elegance. But we were never treated with dignity." The media caught fire. Journalists dug into Helen's past with renewed purpose, unearthing buried stories and long-forgotten murmurs. A clip resurfaced from a 2016 business summit where Helen was seen refusing to shake the hand of a Black tech CEO on stage, pretending not to notice him until cameras turned away. Another video showed her at a charity gala, laughing dismissively when a Latina staff member mispronounced a French term. What was once brushed off as aloofness now looked suspiciously like a pattern. And then Helen made the mistake of going live. In a televised interview, she appeared disheveled, her hair unusually flat, her voice strained with performative remorse. She cried, claimed to be misunderstood, blamed the media, and at one point whispered it was just a misunderstanding. But there was no forgiveness in the air. Viewers saw not a woman seeking redemption, but someone grasping at a narrative she no longer controlled. Meanwhile, Marcus and Lana were being invited everywhere. From universities to civil rights forums, from podcasts to primetime interviews, the couple carried themselves with the same quiet strength they had shown that night. They didn't shout. They didn't retaliate. They didn't gloat. At a nationally televised charity event for Justice for All, Marcus and Lana were introduced as voices of resilience in a time of reckoning. The crowd stood the moment they stepped on stage, clapping not out of sympathy, but out of respect. Lana, in a deep green dress echoing the one she wore that night, held Marcus's hand as they walked to the podium. The applause didn't stop. 4 minutes passed before the host gently asked the crowd to be seated. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was steady, clear. "We never wanted a spotlight. We just wanted a quiet dinner. But if our silence helped expose a truth louder than any speech, then maybe it was never silence after all." The room went quiet, not out of discomfort, but reflection. A major national newspaper ran their story the next day, with a headline that captured everything in a single sentence. She raised her voice. They stayed silent. And yet the world listened to them. And as for Helen, she was removed from the company she built, forced to resign as CEO, stripped from the board of directors by unanimous vote. Her name, once synonymous with luxury and influence, was now a cautionary tale taught in business schools and diversity training alike. And Marcus and Lana, they didn't just leave the table. They stood on a stage the world built for them, with dignity untouched and history watching. As Helen vanished from headlines and boardrooms, a deeper conversation began to take shape, one less concerned with scandal and more focused on the quiet forces that shaped the moment. In a TED Talk that lasted barely 12 minutes but echoed for weeks, Mai Nakamura finally spoke. Standing before a packed auditorium, the young Japanese-American student, now a reluctant public figure, began not with triumph, but with confession. "I didn't start filming to expose anyone," she said, her voice steady, but tinged with vulnerability. "I filmed because I was tired of pretending not to see, tired of the silence we're all taught to sit in when power enters the room." The crowd sat hushed. May explained how she had grown up watching her father, once a server at that very restaurant, navigate a world that barely acknowledged him. Years ago, he had been fired for intervening during a separate incident, trying to defend a black family being subtly denied service. It didn't make the news. There was no camera that time, just a pink slip and a quiet lesson: don't speak unless spoken to. This time, May said, "I had a camera, and a reason." What no one had known was that May's father was the same server who had tried years ago to advocate for dignity and been punished for it. In that viral video, he hadn't spoken. He had only looked away. But the shame of that silence had lived in their household like an unwelcome guest. May's decision to hit record wasn't just about the present, it was about rewriting the past. The clip was in her words my father's voice finally heard. But hers wasn't the only untold story. In the days that followed the interview with Marcus and Lana, reporters began to unearth a different past, one that painted Marcus not just as a victim of discrimination, but as someone who had once fought it on the front lines. Before he became a quiet consultant, Marcus had been a lead trial attorney in several landmark civil rights cases. He'd argued in courtrooms where he was often the only black man in a suit challenging companies, institutions, and cities. He won most of those battles. But the cost had been steep. He walked away 5 years ago, citing burnout and a growing disillusionment with justice that relied too heavily on procedure and too little on empathy. "I used to think justice wore a robe and spoke Latin," he once said in a quieter off-camera moment. "Now I think it speaks in silence and shows up on camera phones." And Lana, whose grace had captured the world, carried a grief no one had guessed. Years earlier, she had lost her younger brother in a police encounter gone tragically wrong. He was unarmed. He was 17. The details became statistics. The story faded from public memory, but Lana never forgot. She never posted about it, never joined marches. Instead, she became a teacher for children who couldn't hear, not because they reminded her of him, but because she wanted to raise a generation that knew how to listen without noise. What no one outside their closest circle knew was that the night of the restaurant incident had been the anniversary of her brother's death. Marcus had planned the dinner not as celebration, but remembrance. They hadn't gone out seeking confrontation. They'd gone out seeking quiet. It was the most bitter twist of all. Meanwhile, as newscasters still spoke of Helen's downfall, some began to dig deeper into her past as well. For years, she had been lauded as a champion of women's rights, a keynote speaker at panels titled Power and Femininity, a self-proclaimed advocate for women of color in leadership. Her website still featured glowing testimonials from diversity initiatives she funded. And yet, behind the closed doors of conference rooms, former colleagues recounted stories of her mocking accents, questioning qualifications, and maintaining a board that remained overwhelmingly white. What began as a scandal of behavior had become a revelation of character. The headlines shifted. This was never just about race. Power has no color, but it has a pattern. And one in bold print, she spoke of empowerment. But her silence said more. In the end, the story was no longer about Helen or even about one night. It became a mirror that showed how easy it was to hide cruelty behind branding, to wrap prejudice in pearls, and to mistake silence for complicity, when in truth it might just be the loudest protest of all. The world had watched a table be stolen and a new one built in its place, not with wood or linen, but with perspective. In the days and weeks that followed, as the headlines faded and algorithms moved on, it wasn't Helen Davenport's name that lingered. It was an image, a single still frame. It wasn't taken by a professional. It wasn't staged or filtered or posed, but it captured something so rare, so unspeakably powerful, that it was shared across the world like scripture. It showed Marcus and Lana walking out of the restaurant hand in hand, back straight, heads high. No tears, no shouting, just silence, just dignity. The door behind them was still swinging shut. That photo outlasted every article, every reaction video, every meme. It hung in classrooms. It was printed in black and white and framed in offices and community centers. People began to call it the Dignity Walk. Teachers spoke of it not as an act of protest, but as a lesson in restraint. Social workers referenced it in workshops. Faith leaders projected it on church walls. In a culture that often confuses noise with impact, that image became a quiet anthem for a different kind of resistance, the kind that walks away not out of surrender, but out of self-worth. Across the country, the ripple grew. Universities reached out to May Nakamura, offering her Speaking Opportunities Awards and full scholarships. But what moved her most wasn't the accolades. It was the chance to launch a program she called Unmute Justice, a platform encouraging young people to document injustice when they see it, to become both witness and amplifier, to transform silence into accountability. She framed her first post with the words, "Your phone is more than a screen. It's a spotlight. Use it." Yet in the midst of this rising wave, Marcus and Lana quietly declined the spotlight. They thanked the invitations, accepted the interviews when needed, but they never let the moment redefine them. In a final televised conversation, Marcus was asked if he saw himself as a leader of any movement. He paused for a long moment before answering. "We're not heroes," he said. "We're just two people who didn't want to fight hate with more hate. That's all." Lana added softly, "Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is not react the way they expect you to." And with that, they stepped back. Returned to their lives, he to his consulting work, she to her classroom of children who still signed their questions with sticky fingers and wide eyes. They didn't carry the legacy of the moment on their shoulders. They let it live in the minds of those who had seen it. Helen, meanwhile, vanished not in death, but in digital erasure. Her social media accounts disappeared one by one. Her name was quietly removed from business directories. The company she founded rebranded, completely new leadership, new mission, new name. It was as if she had never existed in the world she once ruled through money, exclusivity, and carefully cultivated charm. Her voice, once heard on stages, now lived only in an unedited video with 83 million views and a comment section that still burned with the fire she once tried to bury. And yet the ending wasn't rage. The ending was reflection. A final quote appeared in white text on a black screen, closing out the last documentary made about the story, "Not everyone holding a microphone deserves to be heard, and sometimes the ones who leave the table change the whole room." It struck something deep in those who watched, not because it was profound, but because it was true. The world had always measured power by volume, but this time it was measured by restraint, by the ability to carry pain without returning it, by the courage to leave with your pride intact even when no one clapped. And in that stillness, something shifted. For once, justice didn't need a judge. It didn't wear a robe. It didn't arrive in handcuffs or hashtags. It arrived in a glance, in a walk, in a camera held still. And long after the names faded, after the headlines were replaced by newer outrages and fresh distractions, one sentence remained whispered, printed, tattooed in minds like a vow. When the world watches, the truth can't hide. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Your voice matters even when spoken softly.